Hello and welcome to Business Africa with me, Ronald Kato. This week, as debt distress grows in Africa, borrowers are now at the mercy of their creditors. We assess if lenders can offer sufficient debt relief and whether a sustainable solution can be found to prevent future debt crises. Plus, propelled by higher oil prices, Angola is back to growth, displacing Kenya as sub-Saharan Africa's third largest economy in 2023. Nairobi slips 2 slots to number 5 as Ethiopia at $126 billion becomes 4th largest. Also, a conservation enterprise in Rwanda is adding value to trees and herbs to make beauty products. The company hopes to take a slice of the personal care products market, whose value is expected to reach $90 million in 2027. Stay with us for the details. Thank you for joining us. African countries will pay nearly $23 billion in external debt servicing in 2023. That figure is expected to jump 12% to $25 billion in 2024. Zambia has already sought debt relief and is waiting on a decision by its creditors. The same fate awaits Ghana, Ethiopia, and Tunisia, among others. But can debt restructuring alone end the woes of African borrowers?
A sovereign debt crisis is unfolding in Africa. Ghana and Zambia have already defaulted, while Ethiopia and Chad are teetering on the edge. All 4 countries have run to their creditors to restructure their loans. The IMF, too, has been kept busy, giving $3 billion and $1.3 billion in bailout loans to Ghana and Zambia, respectively. With a big infrastructure deficit, many African countries took advantage of low interest rates in the last decade to borrow to build roads, expand ports, power grids, railways, and internet connectivity. For resource-rich countries, debt repayment was made difficult by the slump in oil prices. But the worst damage was done by the COVID-19 pandemic, which forced governments to divert fiscal resources to pandemic control and social protection. The sharp rise in interest rates in 2022 has only made the debt burden much heavier. In seeking debt relief, African governments often meet a new challenge, an international financial system which is creditor-centric. Now, development finance experts argue that for African borrowers to negotiate favorable loan deals, forming a borrowers' club can help.
Etsa Hiwot-Kebret is a finance consultant. She's an expert on debt and development finance. She joins the show from Addis Ababa. Thank you very much, madam, for your time. What is a borrowers' club? How would it work? And would it make debt less stressful for African countries?
So when borrowers seek to gain access to external financing, they often enter into negotiations where they have very limited bargaining power and they're put in a disadvantaged position. And through a borrowers club, countries, African countries, for instance, can club together to take out loans and negotiate debt terms. Countries can share information, for instance, on the terms of their contracts with different lenders, and they can use the club to enhance borrower agency. So borrowers can also use, for instance, each other's growth prospects as collateral to reduce risk. And that is why a borrowers club is absolutely necessary. Countries need to be able to share their experiences and negotiation practices in order to get the most out of the current financial system.
Speaking of the financial system, it is structured mostly in favor of lenders. Would a borrowers' club then tip the power balance in favor of debtors, you think?
Unfortunately, the international financial system is overwhelmingly creditor-centric. Creditors are often organized through clubs or committees, such as the Paris Club, which exclude borrowers from negotiations, and it doesn't take the needs of borrowers into consideration. These clubs sound very nice, but they've existed for years and they continue to exclude borrowers. The reason they only have creditors, for instance, in the room is because they only care about creditors and they want to know what creditors are doing. So in these clubs, for instance, what usually happens is that after a borrower presents their case, the borrower is asked to leave the room and is later informed of the outcomes. But if they truly cared about borrowers and their interests, the borrowers would be in that room. So anything that improves on the system is going to be a better system, essentially.
I'd say 5 African countries have already run to their creditors asking for debt relief, and more are expected to follow. Have African governments borrowed too much?
Well, first, I just want to point out that at Development Reimagined, we don't accept the narrative that we are currently in a debt crisis on the continent. In fact, the real crisis is a lack of access to concessional financing. At least 600 million Africans do not have access to electricity. Only 22% of Africans have access to the internet. This alone requires up to $100 billion of investment just to boost internet capacity on the continent by 2030. So if we don't get cheap concessional financing, where would we get the financing that we need? Our own populations can't afford to pay for this. Our economies are not big enough or rich enough. And this is not even taking into consideration the financing we need for infrastructure, for manufacturing, for job creation, all of that. So we have a crisis of too little debt. And this has been ongoing since the 1980s. And we see, for instance, China that has been very helpful in meeting some of those demands, but that is not enough. And that is why the Borrowers Club would be a great addition, because the whole point is to deliver really cheap concessional finance to countries that would otherwise not have access to that kind of financing. So we really need as many tools as possible in the system.
Speaking of too little debt, essay, an argument has been made that when it comes to Africa, attention is paid to the quantity of debt that governments hold as opposed to the quality of debt. Why is that?
Developed economies have historically taken a lot of debt in order to grow their economies. And we believe the exact same principle needs to happen on the African continent. Countries need to be able, when they take out financing, they need to be able to, first to be able to repay that financing, but they also need to put that financing into productive sectors. That's what we consider to be good debt. So we believe that countries need to be able to be very smart about where they take out their loans, but also in which parts of their economy they decide to put those loans in order for the continent to be able to fill in that financing gap that the continent currently has. We need to have a lot more financing, concessional financing, in order to meet our current needs.
It's a Hiwot Kebret. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Angola's GDP is projected by the IMF to hit $135 billion this year. It means the country displaces Kenya as the third largest economy down the Sahara. With this advantage gone, Kenya also loses the race to attract foreign investment to South Africa and Ethiopia.
Faster GDP growth in Angola and Ethiopia will see Kenya relegated to number 5 in sub-Saharan Africa's economic rankings, according to projections by the International Monetary Fund. Angola returned to growth last year, buoyed by higher oil prices. Before 2022, the country had endured years of recession caused by a slump in oil prices. The IMF expects the economies of Ethiopia and Angola this year to expand by 13.5% and 8.6% respectively on dollar terms. The IMF projects that Nigeria will maintain its position as the biggest economy, with GDP expected to swell to $574 billion, followed by South Africa, Angola, Ethiopia and Kenya. The relegation of Kenya to position 5 will further weaken Nairobi's hand in the race for foreign direct investment. Ethiopia is counting on a peace deal signed last November to revitalize growth, even as debt worries keep investors cautious.
Now, Rwanda's personal care products market is expected to reach $90 million in 2027. It is mostly dominated by imports. One local enterprise making soap and lotions from herbs is taking the lucrative sector by storm.
Okay. Christian Mugabe and his colleagues are the founders of Ngozi Naturals. They have an enormous passion for natural and indigenous plants. This has hence given them the mission to use the plants to create monetary value. They manufacture beauty products such as soaps and beard hair oil, balms, to mention but a few, by using organic herbs from trees.
And I wanted to see how we can bring back that benefit, that native tree spray, to the people of the city. And the best way to do that is make a product that people use daily.
The biggest plan we have currently is tapping into the corporate market, tapping into hotels, big organizations, and providing them with solutions that are more sustainable.
Most developing countries such as Rwanda depend on imported cosmetic products. However, some of these products have proven to be costly for the Rwandan market, non-effective and skin damaging. I immediately started noticing my skin changing and getting better. Rwanda Going Green has made people within the country and the region more understanding about circularity and green products. Ngozi Naturals exports its products to Kenya, Burundi, and Tanzania.
And that wraps up this episode of Business Africa with me, Ronald Kato. The news continues on air and online. Bye for now, and I'll see you on the next episode of Business Africa.